The first gunshot shattered the morning quiet of Williamsburg, Kansas, and Rebecca Winters knew that if she went through with this wedding, her life would be as dead as whatever poor creature had just been killed beyond the general store. She stood perfectly still in front of the cracked mirror in her small bedroom above the millinery shop where she had worked for the past 3 years, her hands trembling as they held the pale blue dress that was supposed to be her wedding gown. It was not white, not new, not anything she had dreamed about as a little girl back in Boston before consumption took her mother and drink took her father. The dress belonged to Mrs. Henderson, the milliner who had taken pity on an orphaned 18-year-old girl arriving on the train with nothing but a carpet bag and her mother's Bible. That had been in 1872, and now it was early spring of 1875, and Rebecca was 21 years old and supposedly in love with Charles Morrison, the bank clerk who had courted her with all the passion of a man reviewing ledgers. Their engagement had been arranged more than chosen, orchestrated by Mrs. Henderson, who thought a single woman working in her shop was a sad reflection on the establishment, and by Charles's mother, who wanted grandchildren and did not care much whether her son actually loved the woman who would provide them. Rebecca had tried to love Charles. She had tried to find something beneath his pomaded hair and starched collar that made her heart beat faster. But every conversation felt like a business transaction. Every touch felt like a handshake. Every kiss felt like signing a contract she had not fully read. When he proposed 3 months ago in the parlor of his mother's house with both mothers watching like hawks over a field mouse, Rebecca had said yes because she could not think of a single good reason to say no. She had no money, no family, no prospects. Charles offered security, respectability, a house of her own. He did not offer love, but perhaps love was a luxury women like her could not afford. The second gunshot made her drop the dress. Rebecca moved to the window and peered down at the dusty main street of Williamsburg. The town was small, barely 300 souls, positioned along the Kansas Pacific Railway line, where cattle shipments brought brief prosperity and long stretches of quiet. She could see the bank where Charles worked, the general store, the saloon that respectable women crossed the street to avoid, the church where she would stand in 4 hours and promise to honor a man she barely knew. A rider appeared at the far end of the street, and something in Rebecca's chest shifted like tectonic plates before an earthquake. He sat on a massive bay horse that gleamed copper in the morning sun, and even from this distance, she could see he was different from the men who usually passed through Williamsburg. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pushed back to reveal dark hair, a shirt that had once been white but was now the color of the prairie, and chaps that marked him as someone who worked with cattle. He rode with an easy confidence that suggested he had been born in the saddle, and when he dismounted in front of the general store with fluid grace, Rebecca found she could not look away. She had no idea who he was or why he mattered, but something in her soul recognized him the way a compass recognizes north. "Rebecca," Mrs. Henderson's voice shrilled up the narrow staircase. "You need to begin getting ready. The ceremony is at noon." Rebecca forced herself away from the window and picked up the blue dress with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. She had made her choice 3 months ago when she accepted Charles's proposal. The stranger on the street was nothing to her, just another cowboy passing through, probably spending his cattle drive wages on whiskey and cards before moving on to the next town. She would marry Charles Morrison, become Rebecca Morrison, and live a perfectly adequate life. The third gunshot echoed just as she finished buttoning the dress. This time she heard shouting, and Mrs. Henderson's footsteps racing down the stairs to the shop below. Rebecca abandoned propriety and ran down after her, emerging onto the wooden sidewalk to find half the town gathering in the street. "It is the bank," someone shouted. "The bank is being robbed." Rebecca's blood turned to ice. Charles was in the bank. Charles was always in the bank, even on Saturday mornings, especially today because he wanted to finish the quarterly reports before the wedding. She gathered her skirts and ran, not caring that she was wearing her wedding dress, not thinking about anything except that whatever she felt or did not feel about Charles Morrison, she did not want him hurt. The crowd had formed a loose semicircle around the bank entrance, everyone too afraid to approach but too curious to leave. The door hung open like a broken jaw, and Rebecca could hear voices inside, one of them high and frightened in a way that made her stomach turn because it was definitely Charles. "Everyone stay back." Sheriff Donovan pushed through the crowd, his hand on his gun but not drawing it. He was old, past 60, and had been sheriff of Williamsburg since before it was officially incorporated. Good enough for keeping drunks in line and settling property disputes, but utterly unprepared for actual violence. "How many are in there?" a voice asked, and Rebecca turned to see the stranger from earlier, the cowboy with the bay horse. Up close, he was younger than she had thought, probably not more than 25, with eyes the color of strong coffee and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His face was all hard planes and sharp angles, weathered by sun and wind, but there was something in his expression that suggested intelligence and humor beneath the rough exterior. "We think 3, Sheriff Donovan said, clearly relieved to have someone asking practical questions. "They went in about 10 minutes ago. There are 4 people inside as hostages, the bank manager, 2 clerks, and a customer. Charles," Rebecca heard herself say. "Charles Morrison is one of the clerks. We are supposed to get married today." The cowboy's dark eyes found hers, and she felt that shift in her chest again, stronger this time, like the earth was rearranging itself beneath her feet. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in the blue dress and the fear on her face, and something changed in his expression. "Congratulations," he said quietly, and she could not tell if he meant it. Another shout from inside the bank, then the sound of breaking glass. The crowd flinched backward, but the cowboy moved forward, angling himself so he could see through one of the windows without presenting an easy target. "Do not be a fool," Sheriff Donovan hissed. "We wait them out. They will take what they want and go." "They have hostages," the cowboy said. "Men like this do not leave witnesses." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Rebecca found her hands were shaking again, and she clasped them together to make them stop. She barely knew Charles, had never felt for him what the novels she secretly read suggested a woman should feel for the man she married, but the thought of him being hurt or killed because of some thieves and their greed made her feel sick. "What is your name?" she asked the cowboy, surprising herself. He glanced at her again, and this time she saw something complicated in his expression, something that looked almost like regret. "Blake Patterson," he said. "I run a ranch about 20 miles north of here, came into town for supplies." "I am Rebecca Winters." She stepped closer, ignoring the sheriff's attempt to wave her back. "Please, can you help them? Can you help Charles?" Blake Patterson studied her with those dark eyes, and she had the strangest sensation that he was seeing not just her face but something deeper, something she kept hidden even from herself. "You love him?" he asked. "This man you are supposed to marry?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Rebecca found herself answering with more honesty than she had given anyone in years. "I do not know," she said softly, "but I do not want him to die." Blake nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he suspected. Then he turned back to the bank, his hand moving to the gun at his hip with the unconscious ease of someone who had used it before. "Sheriff, you have a back entrance to this building." Sheriff Donovan sputtered, clearly torn between asserting his authority and being grateful that someone was taking charge. "Through the alley. Leads into the manager's office. Can you gather 3 men who can shoot straight and follow orders? Now wait just a minute, Sheriff." Blake's voice was not loud, but it cut through the older man's protests like a knife through butter. "Those men in there are getting nervous. Nervous men do stupid things. We can wait and hope they leave peacefully, or we can act while we still have the advantage of surprise. Your choice, but make it fast." Sheriff Donovan looked at Blake, then at the bank, then at the crowd of townspeople watching with terrified, hopeful faces. Finally, he nodded. "Bill, Frank, Tom, you 3 are with me. The rest of you get inside somewhere safe in case shooting starts." The crowd scattered like leaves in wind, but Rebecca did not move. She stood rooted to the spot, watching Blake Patterson check his gun with practiced efficiency, and she felt as though she was watching the hinge point of her entire life, the moment where everything could go one direction or another and nothing would ever be the same. "Rebecca, Mrs. Henderson appeared at her elbow, tugging at her arm. "You must come inside. This is not proper, and if there is shooting, I am staying." The words came out with more force than Rebecca intended. "Charles is in there. All the more reason to preserve yourself. What good does it do him if you are shot before the wedding?" Rebecca pulled her arm free, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago, an hour ago, but which now felt as natural as breathing. "Go inside, Mrs. Henderson. I am staying." The older woman made an exasperated sound but retreated, leaving Rebecca alone on the sidewalk as Blake and the sheriff conferred in low voices. She saw Blake gesture toward the alley, saw the other men nod, saw the careful coordination of men about to risk their lives. Then Blake looked back at her one more time, and she saw him hesitate. He walked over, closing the distance between them in a few long strides, and stood close enough that she could smell horse and leather and something else, something wild and clean like wind across open prairie. "Miss Winters," he said quietly, "I need you to go inside. If this goes wrong, I am staying. You do not understand. These men are likely to come out shooting if they panic, and you are standing right in the line of fire in that blue dress like a target. Then I will move to the side. But I am not hiding while Charles is in danger." Blake studied her face, and she saw frustration and something else flicker across his features. "You are a stubborn woman. You do not know me well enough to make that judgment. I know enough." He glanced back at the bank, at the sheriff waiting impatiently, then back to her. "If I get him out alive, will you do something for me?" Rebecca blinked, surprised by the request. "What?" "Before you marry him, before you stand up in that church and make promises you will spend the rest of your life keeping, ask yourself one question. Do you want to marry Charles Morrison, or do you just think you should?" The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true, because they articulated something she had been avoiding for 3 months, maybe longer. "Why do you care?" she whispered. Blake's expression softened, and for a moment she saw past the rough cowboy exterior to something else, something tender and sad and hopeful all at once. "Because I have seen too many people trap themselves in lives they do not want out of fear of the alternative. Because life is too short to spend it pretending. Because," he stopped, shook his head, "because you deserve better than a marriage based on convenience. You do not know anything about me or my situation. I know you did not answer when I asked if you love him. I know you are shaking, but you will not go inside to safety. I know you are wearing a borrowed dress because you cannot afford your own. And I know you looked at me when I rode into town like I was the answer to a question you have been too afraid to ask. Rebecca opened her mouth to deny it, to tell him he was presumptuous and wrong, but the words would not come because they would have been lies. "Blake," the sheriff's harsh whisper cut through the moment. "We are ready." Blake held her gaze for one more heartbeat, then nodded and turned away. She watched him move toward the alley with the other men, watched him disappear around the corner of the building, and felt as though she was watching something irretrievable slip away. The wait was agony. Rebecca moved to the side as Blake had instructed, pressing herself against the wall of the general store where she could see the bank entrance, but was out of the direct line of fire. The street was eerily empty now, everyone else having taken shelter, and the only sound was the whisper of wind through the eaves and the pounding of her own heart. Minutes crawled past like hours. She found herself praying, something she had not done with any real conviction since her mother died, prayers that were half-formed and desperate. Keep them safe. Keep Charles safe. Keep Blake safe. The last one surprised her, but she did not question it. The shot, when it came, was not from inside the bank but from behind it, followed immediately by shouting and more gunfire, a sudden cacophony that shattered the tense silence. Rebecca pressed harder against the wall, her hands fisted in her skirts, barely breathing. The bank's front door burst open and a man staggered out, wild-eyed and waving a gun. Rebecca recognized him vaguely, someone who had passed through town before, always making her feel uneasy with the way he looked at women. He took 2 steps into the street, then crumpled as Sheriff Donovan appeared behind him, gun smoking. More shouting from inside, then Charles emerged, his face white as paper, supported by one of the other men who had gone with Blake. Behind them came the bank manager and another clerk, all of them stumbling into the daylight like people emerging from a cave. But no Blake. Rebecca pushed off from the wall, moving toward the bank entrance without conscious thought, needing to know, needing to see. Sheriff Donovan tried to wave her back, but she ignored him, stepping through the broken door into the dim interior. The bank was chaos. Papers scattered everywhere, a desk overturned, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. 2 men lay on the floor, both unmoving, and for one terrible moment Rebecca thought one of them was Blake. Then she saw him standing near the back, breathing hard, a cut on his cheekbone bleeding freely, but alive and whole. He turned as she entered, and their eyes met across the wreckage. "Is Charles," she started to say, but Blake cut her off. "He is fine. Scared but unhurt, they all are." He moved toward her, stepping over the debris, and she saw he was favoring his left side slightly. "Are you hurt?" "Me? No, I was outside, but you are bleeding." "It is nothing." One of them got off a wild shot before we could subdue them. Caught me with some splinters from the wall. Rebecca found herself reaching up without thinking, her hand moving toward the cut on his face, wanting to do something, to fix it, to make sure he was really all right. Blake caught her wrist gently before she could touch him, his fingers warm against her skin. "You should go to your fiancé," he said quietly. "He will want to see you are safe." The words were sensible, practical, exactly what she should do, but Rebecca did not move. She stood there with Blake's hand around her wrist, feeling her pulse jump against his fingers, feeling that magnetic pull that made no logical sense, but felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. "Blake. Rebecca." Charles's voice, high and reedy with stress, came from just outside the bank. "Rebecca, where are you? Are you hurt?" Blake released her wrist and stepped back, putting proper distance between them, but his eyes never left her face. "Go," he said, "but remember what I asked you." Then he turned and walked toward the back of the bank, leaving her standing alone as Charles rushed in, his arms reaching for her, his voice babbling about how terrified he had been, how he thought he might die, how grateful he was to be alive. Rebecca let him hold her, made soothing noises, assured him she was fine, but her mind was somewhere else entirely, replaying the feel of Blake's fingers on her wrist, the question he had asked her to ask herself. You want to marry Charles Morrison, or do you just think you should? The wedding was postponed. There was too much chaos, too many statements to give the sheriff, too much for Charles to process. He sat in his mother's parlor looking gray and shaken, and Rebecca sat beside him holding his hand and feeling like an actress in a play she had not auditioned for. We will reschedule for next Saturday, Mrs. Morrison declared, brooking no argument. That gives Charles a week to recover from this ordeal and gives us time to ensure everything is perfect. Yes, Mother, Charles said obediently. Yes, Mrs. Morrison, Rebecca echoed, because that was what was expected. But when she returned to her small room above the millinery shop that evening, she could not stop thinking about Blake Patterson. She wondered where he was, if he had stayed in town or ridden back to his ranch, if his injuries were being properly tended. She wondered why a stranger's welfare mattered to her more than her fiancé's, and she wondered what that said about her upcoming marriage, about everything. She did not have to wonder long. The next morning, Sunday, she went to church as she always did, sitting in the pew she had occupied for 3 years, listening to Reverend Thomas give a sermon about perseverance through trials. Her mind wandered, as it often did during services, but it snapped back to sharp focus when she saw Blake Patterson slip into the back of the church, just as the final hymn began. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his face shaved, the cut on his cheekbone covered with a small bandage, wearing what were clearly his Sunday best clothes, though they were well worn and simple. He stood in the back rather than taking a seat, his hat in his hands, and he was looking directly at her. Rebecca's heart began to pound so hard she was certain everyone around her could hear it. She tried to focus on the hymn, on the words about grace and salvation, but all she could feel was the weight of Blake's gaze on her back. All she could think about was the fact that he had come here, that he had sought her out. When the service ended and everyone began filing out, Rebecca found herself moving slowly, letting Charles and his mother go ahead while she pretended to search for something in her handbag. By the time she reached the church steps, Blake was waiting at the bottom, standing slightly apart from the clusters of families and friends catching up on weekly news. Mr. Patterson, she said, keeping her voice neutral and polite. I am surprised to see you still in town. I needed to make sure you were all right, he said simply. Yesterday was chaotic. I wanted to check on you properly. That is kind but unnecessary. As you can see, I am perfectly fine. Are you? The question was too direct, too knowing, and Rebecca glanced around nervously to see if anyone was listening. Most people were occupied with their own conversations, but she saw Mrs. Henderson watching with interest from near the church door. I cannot talk here, she said quietly. People will gossip. Then walk with me, just for a few minutes. I promise to be perfectly proper and respectable. Rebecca knew she should say no. She was engaged to another man, due to be married in 6 days, and taking a walk with a handsome rancher was exactly the kind of behavior that would set tongues wagging. But she found herself nodding, found herself accepting when Blake offered his arm with careful formality, found herself walking down the street toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to prairie. They did not speak until they were out of easy earshot, following a path that led toward a small creek that ran along Williamsburg's southern border. The morning was beautiful, the sky that particular shade of blue that seemed to exist only in Kansas, the grass already turning green with spring growth. You did not have to come check on me, Rebecca said finally. I know you have your own ranch to return to. I know I did not have to. I wanted to. Blake's voice was quiet but firm. Rebecca, I realize I have no right to interfere in your life. We met yesterday under extraordinary circumstances and you owe me nothing. But I cannot leave town without knowing whether you have thought about what I said. About whether I want to marry Charles or just think I should. Yes. Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face him, suddenly angry in a way she could not fully explain. What gives you the right to ask me that? You know nothing about my life, my circumstances, what I need or want. You ride into town, play the hero for an afternoon, and suddenly you think you can question my choices. Blake met her anger with calm patience. You are right. I do not know your circumstances, so tell me. Tell you what? Tell me why you are marrying a man you do not love. I never said I do not love him. You did not have to. It is written all over your face every time you look at him. The same way it is written all over his face that he sees you as a duty to be fulfilled, not a woman to be cherished. The words hit too close to truths Rebecca had been avoiding, and she felt tears sting her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away, not wanting Blake to see, but he moved closer, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence like a physical warmth. I am sorry, he said gently. I do not want to hurt you, but Rebecca, I have watched too many people settle for lives that make them quietly miserable because they are afraid of taking a risk, afraid of wanting more. My own mother did that. Married my father because he had land and prospects, and she spent 30 years in a house with a man who never really knew her, never really cared to. She died 2 years ago, and I found her diary after. Page after page of dreams she never chased, happiness she never claimed. I swore then I would never trap myself that way, and I would never stand by and watch someone else do it if I could help prevent it. Rebecca wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. You think you are preventing something. All you are doing is making everything more complicated. Maybe. Or maybe I am offering you a choice you did not know you had. She turned back to face him, confused. What choice? Blake took a breath, and she saw determination settle over his features like armor. Do not marry Charles Morrison. Come work for me instead. Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? I need someone to help run my ranch house. Cooking, cleaning, managing supplies. The work is hard but honest, and I pay fair wages. You would have your own room, your own space, your own money. No obligations except the work itself. He paused, then added quietly, and the chance to figure out what you actually want from life instead of just accepting what other people tell you that you should have. You are offering me a job. Rebecca could not keep the disbelief from her voice. You do not even know me. You do not know if I can cook or clean or do any of the things you need. I know you are smart, capable, and stronger than you give yourself credit for. The rest you can learn. Blake's dark eyes were steady on hers. I am not offering this out of pity, Rebecca. I genuinely need the help. My ranch is growing, and I cannot manage both the cattle operation and the domestic work alone. I have been looking for someone reliable for months. You could hire anyone in town. Why me? Because I think you need this as much as I do. Because I think you have been living someone else's life for too long, and you are forgetting what it feels like to make your own choices. He hesitated, then added with careful honesty. And because when I saw you yesterday, I felt something I have never felt before, and I cannot ride away without knowing if you felt it too. The admission hung in the air between them, brave and vulnerable and terrifying. Rebecca's heart was racing again, her breath coming short because she had felt it too, that inexplicable recognition, that sense of rightness that defied all logic. I am engaged, she whispered. Engagements can be broken. I have no money, no family, nowhere to go if I do not marry Charles. You would have a job, a home, options. People would talk. They would say terrible things about me running off to work for a bachelor rancher. My reputation would be ruined. Probably, Blake agreed. Is your reputation worth more than your happiness? Rebecca wanted to say yes, wanted to defend the importance of respectability and proper behavior. But the words died on her tongue because she was not sure anymore. She thought about the next 50 years married to Charles, producing his children, managing his house, making pleasant conversation over dinner while some essential part of herself withered from neglect. She thought about dying like Blake's mother with a diary full of unlived dreams. Then she thought about riding out to a ranch with a man she barely knew, working hard, living simply, but being free in a way she had never been free before. It was terrifying and improper and probably foolish. It was also the first thing that had made her feel truly alive in years. I cannot give you an answer right now, she said finally. This is too big, too sudden. I need time to think. Blake nodded, looking neither disappointed nor surprised. That is fair. The offer stands through Saturday. If you decide you want to take it, come to the ranch. It is called the Double P, about 20 miles north on the Ellsworth Road. Anyone can give you directions. He pulled a small card from his pocket and handed it to her. If you decide to marry Charles instead, I will respect that choice and you will never see me again. Either way, I need to know you made a real choice, not just followed the path of least resistance. Rebecca took the card, her fingers brushing his as she did, and felt that electric spark of connection again. She tucked the card quickly into her pocket before anyone could see. I should get back. People will start to notice I am gone. Of course. Blake stepped back, putting proper distance between them once more. Rebecca. Yes, whatever you decide, thank you for walking with me. These have been the best 20 minutes I have had in a very long time. She did not trust herself to respond, so she just nodded and turned back toward town, walking quickly, her mind churning with possibilities and fears and that dangerous, delicate thing called hope. The week that followed was the longest of Rebecca's life. She went through the motions of preparing for the wedding, smiling and nodding while Mrs. Morrison discussed flowers and Mrs. Henderson fussed over the dress. She sat with Charles in the evening and listened to him talk about the house they would live in, the children they would have, the life they would build together, and she felt like she was watching herself from a great distance. At night, alone in her room, she took out Blake's card and read the simple printing. Blake Patterson, Double P Ranch, Williamsburg, Kansas. Not much information, but enough. She imagined what his ranch house looked like, what kind of work she would be doing, what it would be like to see him every day. She imagined waking up each morning and making choices about her own life instead of living out someone else's script. She also imagined the scandal that would erupt if she broke her engagement 6 days before the wedding. Mrs. Henderson would be mortified, probably turn her out immediately. Charles would be humiliated, and his mother would make sure everyone in town knew that Rebecca Winters was a woman without honor or decency. She would be whispered about, gossiped over, possibly shunned, but she would be free. On Wednesday, Charles took her for a walk after dinner, the same route she had taken with Blake 3 days earlier. They reached the creek and Charles stopped, taking both her hands in his. Rebecca, I have been thinking about what happened on Saturday, how close I came to dying in that bank. It must have been terrifying, Rebecca said, because it seemed like the right response. It was, but more than that, it made me realize something important. Charles looked at her with his pale blue eyes, earnest and serious. Life is short and uncertain. We must make the most of the time we have. For one wild moment, Rebecca thought he was about to say something profound, something that showed he understood her, really saw her. Then he continued, which is why I think we should plan to have children right away, at least 4, ideally 6. My mother has already discussed it with me, and she thinks you have good child-bearing hips. We will need to be efficient about it." The romantic moment, such as it was, shattered like dropped glass. Rebecca stared at Charles, at his pleasant, ordinary face, and realized with crystalline clarity that this was her future if she married him. She would not be a partner or a beloved wife. She would be a function, a role to fulfill, a woman with good child-bearing hips who would produce the required number of children and keep a proper house and never, ever be asked what she actually wanted. "Charles," she said slowly, "do you love me?" He blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "Of course I do. You are exactly the sort of woman I should marry." "Should. But do you want to marry me? Do you ever think about me when we are apart? Do you wonder what I am thinking or dreaming about? Do you want to know who I really am beneath the polite smiles and proper behavior?" Charles looked confused and a little alarmed by the intensity of her questions. "I do not understand what you are asking. We are engaged. We are getting married on Saturday. Why are you asking these strange questions?" "Because I deserve to be loved, Charles, really loved, not just deemed suitable." "I do not think you are being reasonable. My mother warned me that brides sometimes get emotional before the wedding, but your mother," Rebecca interrupted, "does not get to decide how I feel or whether my emotions are reasonable." "Rebecca, you are being very unlike yourself. Perhaps you should go home and rest. The stress of the week has clearly affected you." She looked at him, at the way he was already dismissing her concerns, already reducing her feelings to bride nerves and feminine hysteria, and she knew with sudden, absolute certainty that she could not marry this man. Not on Saturday, not ever. She deserved more. She deserved someone who would ask her questions and listen to the answers, someone who saw her as a whole person rather than a collection of useful attributes, someone who made her feel alive, someone like Blake Patterson. "Charles," she said quietly, "I am sorry, but I cannot marry you." His face went blank with shock. "What? I cannot marry you. I am breaking our engagement. But the wedding is in 3 days. Everything is arranged. My mother will. Your mother is not marrying me. You are, or rather you were, but now you are not." Rebecca pulled off the small ring Charles had given her when they became engaged, a thin gold band with a chip of a diamond, and pressed it into his hand. "I am truly sorry, Charles. You are not a bad man, but we do not love each other, and I cannot spend my life pretending that is enough." "Where will you go? What will you do? You have nothing." Charles was turning red now, embarrassment giving way to anger. "I will figure it out, but I know I cannot do this." She turned and walked away before he could respond, before he could argue or plead or say anything that might weaken her resolve. Her hands were shaking and her heart was pounding, but beneath the fear was something else, something bright and fierce and wonderful. She felt free. Mrs. Henderson did not take the news well. When Rebecca returned to the millinery shop and explained that the wedding was off, the older woman's face went from red to purple. "Are you completely out of your mind?" she shrieked. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You have ruined yourself. No decent man in this town will touch you now, I know," Rebecca said calmly. "But I could not marry Charles. Could not, could not. You ungrateful girl, I took you in when you had nothing. I gave you work, a home, a chance at respectability, and this is how you repay me. By creating a scandal that will reflect on my business. I am sorry my choices will affect you, Mrs. Henderson. I truly am, but they are my choices to make. Get out." Mrs. Henderson's voice was cold now, flat and hard. "Pack your things and get out of my shop. I will not house a woman with so little honor under my roof." Rebecca had expected this, but it still hurt. She went upstairs, packed her few belongings into the same carpetbag she had arrived with 3 years ago, and came back down to find Mrs. Henderson waiting with her arms crossed. "Where will you go?" the older woman asked, her tone making it clear she did not actually care, just wanted to be able to tell people. "I have a position," Rebecca said, "working as a housekeeper for a rancher north of town. Working for a bachelor, you are ruined then, completely ruined. I hope you are satisfied with what you have done to yourself." Rebecca picked up her carpetbag, tucked her mother's Bible under her arm, and walked out of the millinery shop for the last time. It was late afternoon on Wednesday, 3 days before she was supposed to have become Mrs. Charles Morrison, and she owned nothing but the clothes on her back and the courage to choose her own path. She walked to the livery stable and used most of her small savings to rent a horse and saddle. The stableman looked at her strangely, a single woman heading out alone, but he took her money and helped her mount without comment. Rebecca had learned to ride as a child, before her family's circumstances declined, and the skill came back to her as she urged the horse forward, following the Ellsworth Road north out of Williamsburg. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. Rebecca had never been this far from town alone, had never done anything half this impulsive or risky, and she was terrified. But she was also exhilarated, feeling the wind in her hair and the rhythm of the horse beneath her, feeling like she was finally living. The Double P Ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running through it. There was a ranch house, modest but well-maintained, a large barn, several corrals with horses and cattle, and what looked like a bunkhouse for ranch hands. Smoke rose from the ranch house chimney, a welcoming sign in the gathering dusk. Rebecca rode into the yard and dismounted on shaking legs. Before she could figure out what to do next, the ranch house door opened and Blake Patterson stepped out, surprise and something else crossing his face when he saw her. "Rebecca," he crossed the yard in quick strides. "What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" "I broke my engagement," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I told Charles I could not marry him, and Mrs. Henderson threw me out, and you said your offer was good through Saturday, so I came here. If the position is still available, I would like to take it." Blake stared at her for a long moment, and Rebecca saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify. Then, slowly, he smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely happier. "The position is still available," he said. "Come inside. You must be exhausted." He took her horse's reins and led it toward the barn while Rebecca picked up her carpetbag and walked toward the ranch house on unsteady legs. She was really doing this. She had walked away from everything she knew, burned every bridge, and thrown herself into complete uncertainty. It was absolutely terrifying. It was also the best thing she had ever done. The interior of Blake's ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table and chairs, and a rocking chair near the hearth. Everything was neat but lived in, the home of someone who took care of his possessions but was not obsessive about perfection. "The room through there would be yours," Blake said, gesturing to a door on the far side of the room. "It is not large, but it has a good bed and a window. I would take the loft space above." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that suggested nervousness. "Rebecca, I need to be clear about something. I meant what I said about this being a job, nothing more. You would be my housekeeper, but I want you to feel safe here. I will not press for anything beyond that. You have my word." Rebecca set down her carpetbag and looked at this man who had offered her an escape, who had given her a choice when she thought she had none. "Why did you do this? Really? You could have hired anyone." Blake met her eyes steadily. "I told you. When I saw you in Williamsburg, I felt something I have never felt before. I saw a woman who was trapped and scared but trying to be brave about it, and I wanted to give her a way out. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe I just wanted to be near you, and this was the only respectable way I could think of. But I swear to you, I will not take advantage. If all you ever want is to work here and save money and eventually move on, I will respect that. And if I want more—" The words slipped out before Rebecca could stop them, bold and terrifying. Blake's breath caught. "Then we will take it slowly. We will give ourselves time to really know each other, not just fall into something out of convenience or desperation. We will do this right." Rebecca nodded, feeling her racing heart begin to slow. "I should tell you, I have very little experience running a household of this size. Mrs. Henderson had me working in the shop, not in her home. I can cook basic meals and clean, but I might not know how to do things the way you are used to." "Then we will figure it out together," Blake said simply. "I am not looking for perfection, Rebecca. I am just looking for someone real." She felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were not from fear or frustration. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for being brave enough to take it." They stood there in the lamplight, looking at each other, and Rebecca felt the beginning of something new and precious and worth fighting for. The first weeks at the Double P Ranch were an adjustment. Rebecca woke before dawn to start breakfast for Blake, and the 3 ranch hands who worked for him spent her days cleaning and cooking and learning the rhythms of ranch life. The work was hard, much harder than standing behind a counter in a millinery shop, and she fell into bed each night exhausted. But she was happy. Happier than she could remember being in years. Blake was true to his word. He treated her with perfect propriety, never pushing, never presuming, always respectful of the boundaries between employer and employee. But Rebecca was acutely aware of him nonetheless. She noticed the way he smiled when she mastered a new recipe, the way he thanked her for every small thing, the way he sometimes watched her when he thought she was not looking, his expression soft and wondering. She noticed because she was watching him too. She learned that he woke even earlier than she did to check on the cattle, that he had a gentle hand with the horses, that he read books in the evening and loved poetry, though he would probably die of embarrassment if anyone knew. She learned that he was kind to his ranch hands, firm but fair, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. She learned, slowly but surely, that she was falling in love with him. It was nothing like what she had felt for Charles, that dutiful affection based on expectation and convenience. This was different. This was wanting to see his face first thing in the morning, wanting to hear his voice, wanting to know his thoughts and dreams and fears. This was feeling her heart race when their hands accidentally brushed passing a plate at dinner. This was lying in bed at night thinking about what it would be like if he kissed her. The first real kiss came 6 weeks after Rebecca arrived at the ranch. They were working together in the garden behind the house, Rebecca planting vegetables while Blake repaired the fence that kept deer and rabbits out. It was a warm May afternoon, the Kansas sky that impossible blue, and Rebecca was laughing at something Blake had said about one of the ranch hands when she looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "You look happy," Blake said softly. "I have never seen you look this happy." "I am happy. Happier than I have ever been, I think." Blake set down the fence post he was holding and moved closer, kneeling beside her in the dirt. "Rebecca, I know we agreed to take this slow. I know you have only been here a short time and we are still getting to know each other. But I need you to know something." "What?" "I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you in Williamsburg, but now that I know you, really know you, I am certain. You are smart and funny and stronger than you know, and being near you makes me happier than I thought possible." He took a shaky breath. "I am not asking you to say it back. I just needed you to know." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Blake, you do not have to say anything. I do not want you to feel pressured. We can just keep going the way we are, and if you never feel the same way, that is," she kissed him, leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his nervous rambling with the most direct communication she could think of. For a heartbeat, Blake froze in surprise, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rebecca smiled at him with more joy than she had ever felt. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I have been since you asked me if I wanted to marry Charles or just thought I should. You saw me, really saw me, when I felt invisible. How could I not fall in love with you?" Blake's answering smile was incandescent. Then he kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and sweet, and Rebecca felt like she was finally home. They courted properly after that, though they were already living under the same roof in what would have scandalized proper society. Blake took her on rides across the prairie to see the sunset, taught her to rope cattle, showed her the places on his land that he loved best. They talked for hours in the evening, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams for the future, learning each other's souls as well as their hearts. 3 months after Rebecca arrived at the Double P Ranch, Blake proposed. Not with a ring he could not afford yet, not with grand gestures or carefully rehearsed speeches, but with simple honesty on a Tuesday evening as they washed dishes together. "Marry me," he said, his hands covered in soap suds. "Not because you should, not because it is convenient, but because you want to, because you love me and I love you and we make each other happy. Marry me, Rebecca." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you because I want to. Because I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Yes." They were married in late August of 1875 by a circuit preacher who passed through Williamsburg once a month. The ceremony was held at the ranch with only the ranch hands as witnesses, simple and perfect and exactly what Rebecca wanted. She wore a new dress that Blake had insisted on buying for her, white muslin with blue ribbons, and she carried wildflowers from the prairie. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Blake kissed her with reverent joy, Rebecca felt like every risk she had taken, every bridge she had burned, had been worth it for this moment. Their wedding night was tender and nervous and wonderful. Blake was patient with Rebecca's inexperience, making her feel cherished and desired and loved. They learned each other's bodies the way they had learned each other's souls, with curiosity and care and growing passion. When Rebecca fell asleep in Blake's arms, exhausted and happy, she thought she had never felt so completely content. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Money was tight as Blake worked to expand his cattle operation, and there were times when Rebecca worried about whether they would make it through the winter. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense, and the difficulties only seemed to strengthen their bond. Rebecca discovered she had a head for numbers and began helping Blake with the ranch accounts, finding efficiencies and savings he had overlooked. Blake encouraged her interest, never dismissing her contributions as women's meddling, and together they began to slowly build prosperity. They made friends with neighboring ranchers, and Rebecca found she was accepted more readily than she had expected. Out here on the prairie, people were less concerned with scandal and more interested in character. She and Blake developed a reputation as a hard-working, honest couple, and that mattered more than Rebecca's broken engagement to Charles Morrison. She heard news from Williamsburg occasionally. Charles had married within a year, choosing the daughter of a wealthy merchant in a match orchestrated by his mother. Mrs. Henderson still ran her millinery shop and still spoke of Rebecca with disdain when anyone asked. Rebecca felt no bitterness about any of it. That life felt like a dream from someone else's history, not her own past. In the spring of 1876, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Blake one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he went perfectly still before sweeping her into his arms with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. "We are having a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy? I am terrified and elated and more grateful than I can express." Blake kissed her gently. "You have given me everything, Rebecca. A home, a partner, a love I did not know existed, and now this. I do not have words for what I feel." "Then show me," she said with a smile. And he did. Their son was born in January of 1877, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. They named him William, after the town where they met, and Blake cried when he held him for the first time, tears running down his weathered face as he whispered promises to his newborn son. Rebecca watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart expand to hold even more love than she thought possible. This was what she had been meant for. Not dutiful marriage to a man who saw her as a function, but this partnership, this family, this life built on mutual respect and genuine love. The years flowed by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. William grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the ranch and the horses and following his father everywhere. 3 years after William, Rebecca gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Emma, who had their father wrapped around their tiny fingers from the moment they entered the world. Blake's cattle operation prospered, and the Double P Ranch grew from a modest holding to one of the most successful ranches in the region. Rebecca managed the household and the accounts with equal skill, and she and Blake made all major decisions together, true partners in every sense. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake gave Rebecca a gift, not jewelry or clothing, but something far more precious. He handed her a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "I remember what I told you," he said. "About my mother's diary, all those unlived dreams. I want you to fill this with dreams you are living, with joys you have claimed. I want our children to read it someday and know that their mother chose her own path and was happy." Rebecca took the journal with trembling hands, then pulled Blake into a kiss that held a decade of love and gratitude. "I choose this," she whispered against his lips. "I choose you. I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." "And I choose you," Blake replied, "always and forever." As they stood on the porch of their ranch house, their children playing in the yard, the sun setting over the Kansas prairie, Rebecca thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago. Trapped, scared, desperate, standing in a borrowed dress and preparing to marry a man she did not love because she thought she had no choice. She thought about Blake riding into Williamsburg that day, offering her not just help but a genuine alternative, a real choice. She thought about finding the courage to take it, to walk away from security and respectability in favor of freedom and possibility. She thought about every risk she had taken, every conventional wisdom she had defied, every person who had told her she was making a mistake. And she smiled because she had been right and they had been wrong. Love was not something you settled for or accepted as adequate. Love was not convenience or duty or making the best of a bad situation. Love was a choice, made fresh every day. Love was partnership and passion and genuine respect. Love was finding someone who saw you for who you really were and loved you not despite it, but because of it. Love was Blake Patterson asking her if she wanted to marry Charles Morrison or just thought she should, and then offering her a third option she had not known existed. Love was choosing the unknown over the certain, the risky over the safe, the real over the acceptable. William came running up to the porch, his sisters toddling after him as fast as their small legs could carry them. "Papa, Mama, come see. The new calf is walking." Blake laughed and swept Sarah into his arms while Rebecca took Emma's hand, and together the family walked toward the barn, toward the new life that was always beginning on a ranch, toward the future they were building together. Rebecca glanced back once at the ranch house, at the home she had made with Blake, at the life she had chosen. The journal Blake had given her was waiting inside, ready to be filled with the story of dreams lived rather than dreams deferred. She would write about the morning she stood in a borrowed dress and heard gunshots and felt her life begin to crack open. She would write about a rancher with kind eyes who offered her not rescue but choice. She would write about the courage it took to walk away from what everyone expected and toward what she actually wanted. She would write about falling in love with a good man who saw her as an equal, about building a partnership based on mutual respect, about raising children who would know that happiness was not something you settled for, but something you claimed. Most of all, she would write about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that the life you are living is not the life you want, and then do something about it. As the family reached the barn and the children exclaimed over the wobbly-legged calf, Blake caught Rebecca's eye and smiled at her with such love and contentment that she felt her heart swell. She smiled back, then mouthed 3 words that had become their private promise to each other. "I choose you." Blake's smile widened and he mouthed back, "Always and forever." The years continued to unfold, bringing more children, greater prosperity, and deepening love. William grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business. The twins became inseparable partners in mischief, keeping their parents on their toes and filling the house with laughter. 2 more children followed, another boy they named Thomas and a daughter they named Grace, and each one was welcomed with joy and love. Blake and Rebecca grew older together, their hair going gray, their hands becoming calloused and rough from years of work, but their love only deepened. They had built something real and lasting, a legacy not just of land and cattle but of partnership and genuine affection. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, William married with children of his own, the others finding their own paths in the world. "You ever regret it?" Blake asked quietly. "Choosing this life? There were times when it was hard, when we struggled. Do you ever wish you had taken the safer path?" Rebecca took his weathered hand in hers and looked into the dark eyes that had first seen her truly all those years ago in Williamsburg. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me something priceless, Blake. You gave me the freedom to choose, and then you loved me for the choice I made. How could I ever regret that?" "I was so afraid you would say no," Blake admitted. "When I offered you that job, when I asked you to give up everything you knew and take a chance on a stranger with a struggling ranch and big dreams, I was terrified you would choose safety over uncertainty." "I was terrified too," Rebecca said, "but more than that, I was tired. Tired of living someone else's life, tired of pretending to be content when I was slowly dying inside. You offered me a way out, but more than that, you offered me a way forward. You saw me, Blake, really saw me. Do you know how rare that is?" Blake lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I saw a woman who was brave enough to admit she wanted more from life than just survival. I saw someone worth taking a risk for. And I saw a man who was kind enough to offer a choice instead of a rescue. You did not ride in and save me, Blake. You gave me the tools to save myself, and then you walked beside me as I figured out who I actually was. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their youngest daughter Grace playing the piano they had bought her for her 16th birthday, the notes drifting out through the open windows. "Tell me again," Blake said softly. "Tell me about that day in Williamsburg when everything changed." Rebecca smiled because Blake loved this story, loved hearing her tell it again and again as though it was fresh and new each time. "I was standing in front of a mirror in a borrowed dress," she began, "getting ready to marry a man I did not love. And I heard gunshots, and I thought to myself that if I went through with the wedding, my life would be as dead as whatever had been killed. Then you rode into town. On my bay horse," Blake added, the way he always did. "On your beautiful bay horse, looking like you had ridden straight out of my dreams. And you saw me in the crowd and something happened. Something shifted." "I felt it too," Blake said. "Like recognizing someone I had been looking for my whole life without knowing I was looking. You saved those people in the bank, including Charles, and I thought that was the end of it. Just a brave man doing the right thing. But then you came to church the next day. I could not leave without talking to you again. And you asked me the question that changed my life. Do you want to marry him, or do you just think you should? You were so angry at me for asking," Blake remembered with a smile, "because you were right, and I hated that you could see what I had been hiding from myself. But then you offered me a choice. Not marriage, not rescue, but actual choice. A job, independence, the chance to figure out what I wanted. And you were brave enough to take it." "I was terrified enough to take it," Rebecca corrected. "I was more afraid of marrying Charles than I was of riding out to your ranch alone. But yes, I took it. I broke my engagement. I let Mrs. Henderson throw me out. I burned every bridge, and I chose the unknown." "Best decision you ever made?" Blake asked, though he knew the answer. "Best decision I ever made," Rebecca confirmed, "because it led me to you, to this life. To our children and our home and 25 years of being genuinely happy. Not pretending to be happy, not settling for adequate, but actually, truly happy." Blake pulled her close, and Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sunshine and home. "I love you, Rebecca Patterson," he said. "I loved you when you rode into my ranch yard in a borrowed dress with nothing but a carpet bag and courage. I loved you when you burned our first 3 dinners trying to learn to cook for a ranch crew. I loved you when you gave birth to our children. I loved you through every struggle and triumph and ordinary day, and I will love you until the day I die and whatever comes after." "I love you too," Rebecca whispered. "Thank you for giving me a choice. Thank you for loving me enough to let me choose. Thank you for every day of these 25 years." They stayed on the porch until the stars were thick overhead and Grace had finished her piano practice. Then they went inside together, hand in hand, to the home they had built, the life they had chosen, the love they had claimed. The years continued their steady march. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new generations of laughter and life. Blake and Rebecca slowed down as age caught up with them, but they remained partners, sitting together on the porch in their matching rocking chairs, telling stories to grandchildren who listened wide-eyed to tales of gunfights and broken engagements and brave choices. On a warm spring morning in 1915, 40 years after the day they met, Blake and Rebecca sat together watching the sun rise. They were in their 70s now, their bodies worn from years of hard work and good living, but their love was as strong as ever. "Do you remember when I told you about my mother's diary?" Blake asked. "All those unlived dreams." "I remember everything you have ever told me," Rebecca said. "You filled yours, the journal I gave you. You filled it with a life fully lived, with dreams claimed and joys celebrated. Our children will read it someday and know what it means to live authentically, to make real choices." "We did it together," Rebecca said. "Everything we built as partners. That was the gift you gave me, Blake. Not just freedom, but partnership." Blake took her hand, his grip not as strong as it once was, but still warm and sure. "If I could go back to that day in Williamsburg, knowing everything that would happen, all the struggles and challenges and hard times, I would not change a single thing. Every moment with you has been worth it." "Even when I burned those dinners?" Rebecca asked with a smile, "especially then. Because you were trying, learning, growing, because you were real." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, warming their old bones, and Rebecca thought about the girl she had been at 21, standing in a borrowed dress and thinking she had no choices. She thought about the woman she had become, shaped by love and work and the freedom to be herself. She thought about all the women who would come after her, trapped in situations they thought they could not escape, and she hoped that somewhere, somehow, they would find their courage. She hoped they would find their Blake Patterson, someone who offered not rescue but choice, not salvation but partnership. Most of all, she hoped they would be brave enough to take the risk, to choose the uncertain over the safe, to claim the life they actually wanted instead of settling for the life they were told they should have. As the morning brightened and the ranch came alive with activity, Blake squeezed her hand. "I choose you," he said, the words they had spoken to each other 1,000 times over 40 years. "Always and forever," Rebecca replied, completing the promise they had made and kept, the vow that had sustained them through everything. And as they sat together in the sunshine of a Kansas morning, surrounded by the life and family and love they had built from courage and choice, Rebecca Winters Patterson knew with absolute certainty that her story had been worth telling. Her choices had been right, and her life had been exactly what it should have been. Not perfect, not easy, but real and chosen and genuinely happy. And that, she thought with deep contentment, was everything that mattered.